the I-35 itself, right, is about, 60 years old. It kind of post-World War II, the introduction of automobiles, and then there was the big federal program to build all these roads, right? So it's federal money, a federal program that built it. But what you're saying nowadays, the oversight is quasi-state.
Yes, essentially. Yeah. And that's a really interesting, the history of interstates in general is really interesting that you just brought up. President Eisenhower started the interstate program, and the program was intended to build interstates, and the word literally meaning interstate. So it was not, the highways were not supposed to run through cities. They were supposed to go around cities. And in fact, in this book that came out recently called City Limits by Megan Kimball, she finds some archival material which there's a discussion between Eisenhower and some of his advisors. And when Eisenhower and the advisors find out that interstates are being built through cities, they're really upset and frustrated because the point was to, for interstate commerce.
Right.
And cities are a terrible, terrible place to put a highway because cities are congested and there's a lot of density and activity. So for various complicated reasons, which maybe we'll get into later, decisions were made to place interstates through cities, and that's generated a lot of the problems that we see today.
Right. And so Austin specifically, let's talk about the history of where that got placed and why, right? So it does go right through the middle of Austin, right? It's kind of the main artery that goes through the middle of the city. Today's city, right? 60, 70 years ago, what did that look like and how did that end up to be?
Yeah, so the history of the I-35 highway in Austin is ugly, to be quite frank. Before there was I-35, there was a beautiful boulevard called East Avenue.
Okay.
And what happened was that in 1928, the city came up with a master plan, and the decision was made to move all Black and brown people east of East Avenue. So various practices took place, redlining and so forth, that basically required everybody that wasn't white to move to the east of East Avenue. In 1948, a lot of those practices became illegal.
Right.
And 2 years after that, funding was available to put a highway in the Austin area. From an engineering perspective, the placing it on East Avenue did not make any sense. There were various problems involving a bluff. I don't know all of the details. But there were social and political forces at play that wanted the highway there to solidify a racial segregation line at a time when a lot of the segregationist practices were no longer allowed by law.
Okay. I've heard that the width of the East Ave was like ideal for a highway. Is that false narrative, or is that just kind of a byline?
I haven't heard of that. I have read some, original source material about some of the discussions about the placement. And the engineers claimed that that placement was problematic. But so I don't remember where in West Austin it was going to be, but it was going to be from the engineering. The engineers wanted it somewhere in the West.
Right.
And there was huge pushback. People refused to have a highway near them. And so that's why it was placed there. But I haven't heard the thing you mentioned, so that's something I should look into.
So you're saying it's mostly racial segregation-ish sort of thing?
Yeah. And also just the fact that, white people didn't want highways polluting their air,
Right.
So it was, there was both the intent to segregate, and then there was also the decision about who would bear the brunt of the impacts of having a highway nearby.
Right.